If that's what you mean, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm in. I'm in.
Oh, all right. So for those who don't know, this is Happy. Is that Happy?
Coach Happy.
Coach Happy.
Yeah. Branding.
Charles is a.
That's not my name.
Is that your first name?
No.
So when I first met CJ, he didn't look like that.
Oh, I had the beard, right?
Yeah, you did.
Yeah, that was sweet.
It's pretty awesome. But I thought what was interesting too is like when you actually watch his athletes work, it's a great example of like you can be super judgmental. You can talk to a lot of people. You can basically say, hey, you know, like how much do you know? And you have like coaching conversations with them. You're always kind of testing where people are. But I got a chance to see some of his other coaches, and I got to see some of his athletes. When you get an athlete that knows more than the majority of coaches that are really well known and or executing stuff with a level of consciousness that is greater than the attention to detail that coaches deliver it with, it makes you go, okay, it takes a second look at like who they are, right? And you know, I'm very judgmental, if you guys haven't noticed that, and I'm very blunt. And you know, I was really hard with CJ in the beginning in the sense like, hey man, like you're smarter than you think you are. I don't know why the fuck you think you're acting like this. I don't know what's going on. Like you are like your shit is good. And I don't say that about anybody. Like I don't say that about anybody. I constantly try to find the holes in people I care about because those are the people I want to invest in. People that have holes in people I don't care about, it's like, hey, fuck it, let them like fall. I don't care. The people that have holes in areas in which I care about, I want to try my best to see how we can kind of like augment what's going on. And in CJ's role, in my opinion, it was like, dude, you got this part. Like this is the hardest thing. How are you doing this? And I was like, oh man, you're so connected with all these other people. It was great. And it was awesome to kind of see, his other athletes do things. To the point where like if an athlete's in that area, boom, I'll just send them to CJ. It doesn't matter what the sport is. And it's been awesome to see kind of the results and see people come back and almost kind of compete in the sense of like, hey, like Cat had this athlete go over here, and he gets to see some shit. You get to trust. I trust that he would point those things out, and then work with it, which is great. So it's been a lot of fun. And if you guys ever get a chance to have a couple drinks with CJ, you'll have the best athlete out of your life. We had Ken Kanakin, Joel Prosovics. I swear to you, I think. If I called Joel right now and FaceTime with CJ, he'd probably do like a catch a cramp just from the memory.
Joel.
He had Joel like on the floor crying. So he's one of the funniest people, but he's one of the people that I trust to do one of the best in business. So don't suck today.
Yeah, man. Jeez. That means a bunch to me. Cav's like one of the only 4 people in the industry that I really respect and admire and all those good things. And that'll be the last good thing I say about Cav for the rest of the day. We are working off a broken model in the industry. I'm going to try to surmise that in 20 minutes and hopefully put a Band-Aid on it before we leave. Okay, so first things first, Cav gave me a great introduction. Again, I appreciate it, but a little bit about me. I own a gym. It's called Appenzeller Training Systems. We're in West Berlin, New Jersey, which is essentially the armpit of America. And we just so happen to deal with some elite level athletes almost kind of randomly in West Berlin. I'm a consultant that is Charleston Southern University, but for Division I universities. And most importantly, and the thing I think I have to draw on the most is the idea that I still coach. I'm coaching every day. This is not what I'm going to talk about today. It's not like a philosophy based on what could be. These are things that we're actively putting into practice and every single day, testing, retesting, tweaking, making better. I'm also, it's worth mentioning here, I'm a giant softie. I'm going to tell some stories. As funny as I am, I'm also very soft in that way. I'm going to tell some stories about some of my athletes. There is 0% chance I get through this without crying, but we'll try our best. So what are we here for? We're here to create better athletes. Specific to this talk, we're here to create better baseball players. We're here to give baseball players hopefully the opportunity to live out a lifelong dream and maybe play professionally, or at least at their highest potential level. But the thing to understand about baseball is that baseball is a skill-driven activity. Like many sports, of course, but even more so than most, you have this idea of like a skill paradigm around baseball where almost in no other sport could you see 2 guys on the field at the same time, with this much of a size difference. But in baseball, you can. So that speaks to just how skill-driven it is, and it really speaks to some of the nihilism around baseball strength and conditioning in the industry. This idea that we can't improve performance or that it's not worth trying to improve performance. I disagree with that wholeheartedly, and I think we need to work off of a complete model. So for me, I call it the ceiling and the basement, or the floor and the ceiling, right? And the ultimate goal, again, is to create better baseball players. And hopefully, when you leave here today, you'll have some idea of what I think about in terms of a complete model and some of the places where we're missing the boat thus far in the baseball performance industry. So we got to define kind of what these terms are. We start with, this idea of what's the basement, right? The basement for me is the foundational stability of the athlete. Everyone knows the best ability is availability. If you can't pitch, if you can't get on the field, if you can't play a position, well, you're pretty much useless to the team, right? So that is the first and foremost thing we want to address. Some guys do a great job of this and then leave the rest. Some guys do a horrible job of this to flash numbers on Instagram and do different things, and we'll talk more about it in a second. But this is the foundational piece. Remember, a pyramid can only go as tall as the base is wide. This is where we have to start. I'll tell the story about Logan a bit later. Ceiling. What is the ceiling? Well, the ceiling is impacting the specific biodynamic markers that drive up on-field performance. This is where a lot of this nihilism or this idea that, hey, we can't improve performance in baseball comes in, and I totally disagree. You want to get texts like this. You want to get texts like, hey, I just threw 99 miles an hour. You want to get texts like, I ran a 6.3 on a laser time at Metro Scout Day. And ultimately, you want to get texts like this, I just signed a full ride to Wake Forest, or, hey, I got picked in the 11th, 19th, 35th, 21st, 34th, 14th, 4th round, right? And we can do that by impacting both this idea of foundational base and ceiling potential. I want to introduce really quick the incomplete camps. This is not going to turn into a smashing session. I could have put people's names up there, but I won't. So the one camp is this idea that size and strength must be the answer. These are your typical, I love Louis. Like, Louis the man. Have you guys seen this stuff? You box squat. It's awesome. Bands, chains, all that good stuff. We're going to pull the most weight we can. Well, the only problem with that is there's 4 guys in Major League Baseball this year that have an average fastball over 100 miles an hour. One of them is Jordan Hicks. He's on the left. He's listed at 6'2", and I made a note that he's listed at 6'2", because if you ever stand next to him, he's 5'9". I'm not sure where they got 6'2". Okay, he's about 180 pounds listed. I'm going to go ahead and say he's sub 170. But again, average fastball over 100 miles an hour, the pinnacle of performance in baseball pitching. On the other side, we have Duran from the Twins, listed at 6'5". He's all of 6'5", maybe even 6'6" in spikes, 230 pounds. If he takes his shirt off, he has a six-pack, and he's jacked. This slide used to have Chapman on it, but then he just never reported back for the playoffs, so I took him off, okay? If size and strength is the answer, why don't these 2 guys look more alike? Why don't these 2 individuals both, tip the scale at 230 pounds, right? So that must not be the only answer. Well, it must be then we have to throw more at high intensity, right? You got to throw more, run and gun, underload, overload baseballs. We'll get there in a second, right? Well, the only thing that we know about injuries and about really what moves the needle, so to speak, in your risk factor stratification is this idea of fewer days between games, higher mean pitches throughout the course of a given week, given month, given whatever the case may be. If we're constantly throwing at high intensity, we're constantly trying to mimic the environments of gameplay, there is an absolute benefit to that from a performance-related standpoint, but you have to understand there's a huge risk associated with it as well. So I'm not saying strength and size are not the answer, and I'm not saying throwing more at high intensity is not the answer. I'm saying these camps are incomplete in their thought process. And then last but not least, we have, the weighted ball camp. Shout out to Mike Reinhold. I stole this picture from him that he probably drew on a napkin, but it made sense. What we know is that underload baseballs induce significantly more stress, whereas overload may not induce the velocities required for neural adaptation. If the goal is to throw harder, if the goal is to increase velocity, we know these light baseballs will work, in terms of neurological stress. With that being said, though, we also know there's significantly higher risk. We know that these overload baseballs probably aren't great for neurological stress, and this is, did a talk with the Ignite guys, and I talked to you guys about this, but we know that there may be some movement characteristics around overload baseballs that have good carryover that ultimately can improve performance. Again, are weighted balls right or weighted balls wrong? That's not the question. The question really becomes, where are they in your toolbox? What percentage of your training are they? And that's what I'm here to talk about today, creating a complete model. So as a performance coach, we have to have our lens. We have to be very clear about what it is that we do and where it is that we impact the athlete. We have 3 physical prep constitutes, right? We have bioenergetic demands, biomotor demands, and then biodynamic demands. I'm not going to talk at all about bioenergetics today. 2 reasons. Number 1, baseball players can be fat. It's fine. That's kind of a joke, but it's neither here nor there. And number 1. And number 2, Cav gave me 20 minutes, and I have 40 slides, so I'm not going to have time. So let's start at biomotor, all right? This biomotor overlay around what I call my baseball strength 3 rings is super important. So my 3 rings are movement, physicality, and skill. Now, there are points of connection between these subcategories, but from a biomotor perspective, we're looking at the athlete's ability to move effectively, and we'll talk more about it, and his ability to be physical and what I would call robust. So when we look at movement capacity, we have 3 subcategories with shadow questions. We have the subcategory of mobility, and for me, and Rob did a great job talking about his screen, right? We want to screen some level of movement. For me, it's can the athlete reach the position they desire? That's mobility. Fluidity is can the athlete reach that position smoothly with accompanying movement? And then finally, can the athlete coordinate multiple movements together, right? So if the athlete can't do this, this is your baseline foundation. This is where you have to start. This is where you have to put all your time, energy, and effort. And you might say, CJ, do you mean to tell me that if an athlete can't reach the position they desire, you enhance their entire training program, your entire philosophy around getting them to reach that position? The answer is yes. So I want to tell you guys a quick story about this guy. These are 3 direct quotes from Logan. My hips are dog shit, with no context at all. That was the first thing this kid ever said to me. I'm on a consulting job in South Carolina. This 6'6" kid, freshman at the time, 17 years old, walks over to me, looks down at me, because I'm 5'7", looks down at me and goes, my hips are dog shit. I'm like, who are you? Like, what are you talking about? He's like, yeah, it's just, they're not working for me. I'm like, okay, well, why don't you let me help you? And he goes, I got a guy. I'm like, oh, you got a guy? Okay. He's like, yeah. I was like, so why'd you tell me your hips are dog shit? He's like, I just wanted to know if you had a stretch. I'm like, this makes no sense. Fast forward, that was the fall of his freshman year. Yeah, June, he called me on the phone. Didn't have his number saved. I'm like, who is this guy from South Carolina calling me? And he's crying on the phone. He goes, can you help me? I'm like, I could sure try. What's going on? He had torn his UCL. Back to this idea about my hips are dog shit. There were some big mechanical flaws that had to be addressed, and we really had to work. And I won't go into all the details of what we had to do, but I told him on the phone, I said, listen, the only way I'll help you, because this guy is the same guy who told me he had a guy. I said, the only way I'll help you is if you move to New Jersey and live in my basement for the next 9 weeks. And he's like, are you serious? I'm like, yeah. He's like, okay, I'll do it. Then I had to call my fiance, say, hey, I just invited some college kid to live in our basement for 9 weeks. She's like, you're an asshole. I'm like, I know. But fast forward now, that was 4 years ago. This last year, he signed his free agent deal with the Milwaukee Brewers organization. He was at my house when he got the call. He still lives in my basement. And free agents don't make any money, so he still lives in my basement. But we're working, right? We've now helped to get this athlete to the level of living out a lifelong dream from a position where he thought he would never play again, from a position where he thought he would never come back to be the athlete he was. He wound up transferring out of that school to NC State. You see him in the Wolfpack jersey there. Obviously a major driving force, a top 15 team in the nation for baseball, and ultimately got to live out that dream because we addressed the movement. So one of the things I hate when I go to talks is like people will talk about stuff. Cav is guilty of this. He'll just be like, yeah, I fixed Joey, right? And we're like, shit, that's awesome. Tell us how you did. He's like, no. Right? So for me, I want to give you some tactical advice before you leave. So you write some stuff down. Even if you don't work with baseball players, hopefully the concepts transfer. Does that make sense? So what should you do? I think you should know the beginning before the end, right? I hope this works. Chances? I'll try to click it, right? So you have to know what high-level rotation looks like before you can get people to rotate at a high level. This is Shohei Ohtani, not one of my athletes, unfortunately. That would be awesome, right? But I use him as the example because he's one of the best rotators in all of sport, right? He creates amazing segmented rotation between his thorax and his pelvis. And if we're going to get athletes to do that, we have to understand, hey, what does it look like at the highest level before we start working backwards from it? So for me, one more time. Oh, yeah. That's clean. There's no doubt. There's no doubt. But the Angels are so bad. It's like, shout out Mike Trout, just wasting his career there. So this idea of an assessment, I'm not going to go through all these, right? I want to give you a quick snapshot. These are some of the things we do in our movement assessment from a movement standpoint, not a physicality assessment, right? Be clear, I'm still on part 1 of foundation. Nobody give me a time check. All right. We want to check in on these categories, these kind of subcategories that make up high-level rotation at a rudiment level, and then start to build it out and eventually allow for it to be coordinated and fluid, right? So if you're not checking these subcategories of what we're ultimately trying to get to, if you're not starting with the end in mind, well, you're going to miss the boat, right? You're going to miss some opportunities to create really the change you want to see in your athletes. Now, my caveat to all assessments is that assessments have to influence your programming or your coaching, or don't do them. And it's fine if you say, hey, I'm looking at your list, CJ, and I see, lateral flexion. I'm not sure how that would influence my program. That's fine. Don't test it, right? Don't waste your time. Don't waste the athlete's time. Assessments are not time necessarily to be a sales tool, at least in my mind. For me, I want to get information so I can start moving the athlete down the path, right? So that's my caveat for assessments. Now, as fast as possible. Second piece of biomotor ability for me, in my lens of biomotor ability, is physicality. And physicality to me are these 4 subcomponents, but the most of which, or the overarching shadow question of this category, is the idea that, is the athlete robust? Is the athlete robust? If the athlete is not robust for his game, for his season, which, by the way, if you're preparing high school guys, you're actually preparing them for their practices, their dumbass practices. So if they're not ready for that, for the next stressor, then ultimately you failed as a strength and conditioning coach. I'm going to tell you another story. I swear to God, this kid's name's Logan too. At some point, you got to be like, yeah, this guy's just making people up. Logan was roommates with Logan at NC State. Logan calls one day. He goes, hey, I got your number from Logan. This is like you didn't need a map, follow this. But he goes, I'm a junior and I've never pitched in a college game. And I said, oh, you probably suck. And he said, no, I don't suck. I'm on my 3rd arm surgery and no one can figure out what's wrong with me. And I'm like, well, we could try it. I'm like, did he tell you what you have to do? He's like, move to Jersey. I'm like, yeah, you got to move to Jersey. 4 weeks in the break. He's like, in 4 weeks, you'll have me ready to pitch. I'm like, I'm going to try my best. That was before this, right? So he went from pitching 0 innings in 3 years to establishing himself as a weekend starter and logging 66.2 innings last year. Again, you all know, you've been an athlete, you've worked with athletes, you know what it means and how much of your identity, for better or for worse, is wrapped in sport. And to not be able to get out onto the field and do the thing that you love, that you've been working for your entire life as a 21-year-old man is a pretty moving opportunity. This is a guy who simply wasn't robust. He didn't move well either, but he simply wasn't robust enough to withstand practices, bullpens, game. He couldn't get there. He would be healthy at the beginning of the season. By the time game started, his arm would be blown out again, right? And again, 3 surgeries certainly doesn't help the idea. So we really have to start to think about if strength is a subcategory, if it is worth chasing, how strong is strong enough? And I gave a talk to this group before. Some of you were here, some of you weren't, about this idea. And I literally this was the only thing in the talk, was this idea that, strong is strong, Strong, strong. You strong, I'm strong. See you at Summer Strong. No, you won't. Never mind. Strong is strong, and then they're strong enough, right? We don't need to continue down the path of chasing maximal strength once we've reached a level that makes the athlete robust enough, okay? So I want to be really clear about that. The research is clear that, yeah, strength makes the athlete more resilient, but when the training for strength starts to now take away the neurological demands of the technical, tactical preparation of the athlete, we've gone too far, okay? So yes, you can get too strong. So what should you do? You know, some actual tactical information to take home. Well, you should find where your athletes or where your sport athletes or whatever your sport is get hurt the most, and you should do some level of testing around those areas, right? So for me, we do a lot of these crane scale isometric testing. 9:19 this morning, I've made this slide, right? But we test a lot of positional isometrics around key areas or focal point areas that we see break down in athletes. So we do shoulder testing, we do groin testing, we do lat testing, and ultimately we track these numbers and we have standards established that say, hey, this is probably too low and this is a yellow flag for us. You'll notice I say yellow flag and yellow light, not red flag, red light. That's very on purpose, specific to the athletes I deal with. Everybody tells baseball players that they're broken. That's like a big selling point and a strategy to be like, you can't move, dude. Like you're not gonna be able to like do anything. I always say yellow because I'm like, listen, this is like a yield sign. Like we should do some other stuff to kind of start to address this issue. But if you leave here today, don't work with me and go out on the field, you're probably not gonna die. Like you're just not, right? But it's important. I got this text yesterday. One of my guys is in strength camp with Houston Astros. They do isometric testing as well. Go figure. They're the best development program in the country or in Major League Baseball. And his shoulder score went up 30 points on internal and external rotation, and his abductor tests went up as well. So obviously what we're doing has carryover, and what we're doing has merit. It holds kind of weight, so to speak, in the professional realm, which is important, especially with a good organization like the Astros. So that's what you should do. Last but not least, I got to be fine on time. I'm rocking this thing. Last but not least, we have the intersection of my three rings, right? The movement, the physicality, the skill, where we intersect, where really the magic happens, right? And we call this our biodynamic lens. Now, if you've heard of biodynamics before, you've seen the principle of dynamic correspondence, right? And if you haven't, well, welcome. Well, welcome to strength and conditioning. At this most basic level, you want to think about biodynamics as shapes. This is how I explain it to my interns. What shape is the athlete in? Obviously a hashtag, no, I'm just kidding. What shape is the athlete in when he goes to do his thing? What does it look like, right? And then to get a little bit more specific, what are the key muscle groups, the direction of force, the magnitude of the force, the contact times and the contraction times that the athlete needs to utilize to be successful? And then working backwards from that, how can we get pretty close to create dynamic correspondence and ultimately create transfer onto the field? I'm going to tell you guys a really quick story about one of my pro athletes, and then I'll work backwards. This is an athlete who came to me and he said, something's got to give right now. I said, I don't know what you're talking about. He said, I drove an hour and 10 minutes here. I'm from North Jersey. Somebody told me that you were good at this stuff and you could help me improve my velocity. This is a guy who already had the foundation sound. 4 years of college baseball on a relatively okay strength and conditioning program, had been lifting on his own, had other strength coaches, had laid what I would call the foundation. Looked mechanically beautiful, could move through range of motion. You put him on the table, everything is great, right? But was averaging his fastball around 92.5 miles an hour and was in single A in this 5th year of his contract. So that's not going to work, right? That's not going to ultimately get you to live out your dream of stepping onto the mound at Yankee Stadium and being the best reliever for the New York Yankees for the entire year. So we had to do some things, right? And we had to meet him where he was. The foundation was laid. So if I were to take that time and say, hey, let's do some movement protocols, okay? Let's do some West Side Barbell for skinny bastards. Let's move you in that direction, right? We would have been wasting time, and ultimately we would have cut off his potential to do the lifelong dream, the childhood dream. They have like so many pictures of him with like a Yankees hat when he's like 7. I'm pretty sure they're all like photoshopped, but it's fine, right? But you notice here, this is just a quick write-up. His changeup, which is top 10 in baseball, by the way, playing off a four-seam fastball that sits 94.4 miles an hour and touches 96. He actually touched 100, it's fine, is his best weapon, right? the day he started with me, his fastball on Baseball Savant was 92.5 miles an hour average. It would jump 2 miles an hour in one COVID offseason, right? He did not do any extra throwing. He did not throw a weighted baseball with me. What we did was we worked backwards from what had to happen, and we took a look at what are we ultimately trying to do. We're trying to get him better at throwing, right? We're trying to address these key KPIs through my lens, right? We're trying to address his mound velocity, his max velocity, his average velocity, maybe his pull down velocity, maybe his positional velocity, and maybe we're trying to impact spin rate as well. When we look at this, first and foremost, everybody has this skewed perspective of baseball. And if you don't work at like the highest echelon, it can be even more skewed. Guys will be like, I need to throw 95. I need to throw 99, or I'm not going to get picked, or I'm not going to have the opportunity. I just like to give these numbers. Around 16% of D1 college baseball players is 96 and above. 73 big leaguers out of 400 pitchers last year are over 96. It's not that many guys that throw that hard. There's not, right? If you looked at social media, you would think I was crazy, but there's just not that many guys that throw that hard. But you do want to try to move guys specifically down this route if it's going to help save their career or open up the opportunity for them. So you have to understand, I used the hitting example earlier with Shohei. This is one of my pro athletes who plays in Italy. His name's Christian, but this is actually a really bad throw from him, which is why I just like the picture. But you have to understand that we have a pelvic rotation, a thoracic rotation, an elbow extension moment, and then arm internal rotation aggressively to lead leg extension. Now, how do we start to break down this entire KPI into subsequent parts and address each individually or address what we can? Oh, what do we do? We have to understand what's going to create the most transfer, right? Everyone's seen this chart before. For the young athlete, the middle school athlete, to Rob's point, the high school athlete, some squats, if you like those, some lunges, great. For someone who's already elite, like Ron in the story I told you about, we have to get really high up on the pyramid in terms of specificity in order to create true transfer to the field. So he did a lot of things that break down pieces of rotation, right? And I'll just give you a couple quick examples of what this looks like. These are kind of the ones that people haven't seen before or maybe are less familiar with. He had to do a lot of preloading the back hip, and these are not all necessarily him, I just had demo videos. But he had to do a lot of preloading of the back hip, gathering tension, gathering eccentric load, and then going forward at high rotational speeds. He had to do a lot of this type of work, which we call ascending correspondence clusters, which move him in the direction of, with each subsequent exercise, being more and more specific, breaking down the subsequent parts that are ultimately going to create the transfer that you want. Again, this is not Ron, but demo, for demo's purposes, right? So moving from something that's relatively general into something that's a little bit more specific, into something that's a little bit more specific, into something that's really specific to what we're trying to accomplish, right? And again, this is just the understanding that we can and should be addressing both the floor for the athlete and also the ceiling. And this is the ceiling type of work. Last thing I'll show you guys, med ball contrasts, right? Where we do a heavier med ball throw, followed by a powerful med ball throw with a preload. Again, this is the type of work where guys who are already advanced and already have a foundation in place. Oh man, Kane, I'm never getting out of here now. 2 videos, 1 slide. There we go. The guys who are already have a foundation in place, already are relatively elite for their sporting prowess, need to start to work. And that, my friends, is where we have to move. To not just working with one tool in the toolbox, to not just working on one aspect of development, but moving towards working on a full model that impacts both the ceiling and the floor. Thanks, guys. I had to be close. I had to be close on 20 minutes. Ish. Close enough.
It was 20 minutes within that time frame.
Within the 40 minutes of my talk? I'm sorry. I tried really hard to be short. You also said, put 10 pounds of shit in a 5-pound bag. That was a direct quote.
That is a true statement.
There was like 20 pounds of shit in there.